Okay, well, I had recorded a phone call with a student that I was trying to help um, get started with this assignment, and I guess the recording didn't work, so I'm just doing a talk over now of the work that we did um, to my best recollection. And what I'm explaining to her right now is that uh, this is the beginning of the investment portion, and I've copied and pasted in um, the basic starting point for the first investment, which is the IRA. I'm telling her right now that there's a cell B7, which is where you would start your work, is where the formula is going to go. And right now I'm going over to the assignment description, and I'm reading out where it says manually enter a formula that will calculate the balance of the IRA investment in B7. To do this, take the previous balance, add the contribution, and then add the earned interest, which is the previous balance times the interest divided by 12. And so I'm explaining to her that this sentence, the second sentence of that bullet point, is referring to cells. For example, the previous balance is just the cell that has the previous balance, which is the cell directly above the cell you're working in. And that's a balance that will float and change as each month goes. And I'm asking her to go ahead and try this on her own. I'm trying not to do the work for her. And any of you that would have called, I would have asked to do the same thing. It's also at this point that I'm finding that I'm disappointed that I can't follow along as she's doing the work because Google Sheets actually locks out the cell when one person's working in it. And I actually hadn't done collaborative work in Google Sheets before, so that was kind of news to me. I'd done collaborative work in Google Docs, where there's no locking out. You actually see people working at the same time. So right now I'm essentially waiting for her to type in what I had explained, which is you type in a formula, you start with the equal sign, and then let's start with the very first of the three things, which is the previous balance. So I'm telling her to just type in equals B6, which is the previous balance. So right now I'm waiting, and there it goes. She's finished it, and if you notice, it says the same thing as a cell above it, so essentially 0. Then I pop back to the description, and I'm pointing out that the second part is adding the contribution. So I told her to go back in, and right now she has B6 in there currently, and I told her to add B2, which is the monthly contribution. And it's at this point I go in and I notice that the cell's right, but it's giving an error message, which is odd to me. I'm actually confused because I don't understand why adding 2 cells would give an error message. And I'm going to work through this and figure out that I'm doing it by myself in a different cell just to see. And I say, oh, I do get an error message. Weird. So then I start from scratch and I say, okay, does 50 plus 0 work? And it does work, so that tells me there's something wrong with the cell. And I realize what's probably wrong with the cell is that when I copied and pasted, it just pasted the string, the $dash string instead of the value 0. And now once I change it to 0, notice that her equation worked. It says $50. So previous balance, which is a balance which is 0, plus the monthly contribution, which is 50, equals $50. So I believe I'm going to pop back to the to the other equation now, or I'm sorry, to the description, and we're going to talk about the next thing which needs to happen. There we go. I'm back at the description, and there's the third thing, which is the interest. which is the cell with the previous balance, the cell with the interest, and you divide that by 12. All right, here I'm making sure the interest cell is in there correctly after the previous situation with the stuff not pasting in correctly. And I can see at this point that she has entered in the formula correctly. She has previous balance plus contribution plus interest. And now I'm talking to her. Not sure what I'm doing right now, actually. We were confused as to why it was still $50, even though she added the interest, and then we're realizing that if you have a balance of $0, that the interest accumulated on that would also be $0, which is why it's still just 50. And so we're laughing about the fact that we should definitely have known that beforehand, but regardless, we're going to move on. All right, now I'm telling her if you autofill this, you're going to have a problem because you see it's $8 million right there, and we have these errors, and I point out the fact that if you're not locking down cells, so we're going to double click in one of these and see how the cells have moved down, the interest rate and contribution have shifted. Again, there's the relative and absolute referencing, with the default being relative referencing. So I'm explaining to her she needs to lock down certain cells, and she's realizing that the cells that need to be locked down are probably the ones at the top. So this would be the contribution and the interest rate. So I think at this point I'm waiting for her to do it. It looks like she's locked it down. So now we're going to try this autofill again. And it's doing the right thing. It's doing what it needs to do. So I explained at this point that she has the core equation ready to go, really. This is exactly what is going to calculate this growth trajectory. But unfortunately, this isn't the only part of the equation, because if we go to the next sentence, it talks about the fact that we have a max on when we want to stop contributing. So that's that cell that says $10,000. And when you have to make a decision in Excel, or in any spreadsheet for that matter, you would use an if function. And the if function that we're going to do here is we're going to say the cell that I'm in, so that the current balance, in other words, which is the whole formula, if the current balance is greater than this max balance, then our formula would be the previous balance plus the interest, and that's it. Just the previous balance plus the interest. Otherwise, our formula will be the previous balance plus the interest plus the contribution. So what that's saying is, if I've hit a max balance, I'm no longer adding the contribution to the balance calculation for that given month. And you just have two possible scenarios there. Either I've hit the max balance or I haven't. If I've hit the max balance, I don't add the contribution, I only add the interest. if I have hit the max balance. If I have not hit the max balance, then I'm adding the interest and the contribution. So her and I are in the middle of discussing this right now. And I think I'm also explaining to her right here that in the if portion that she would have to use that entire equation in order to do the check. Remember in an if function, there's the check, what to do if it's true and what to do if it's false. And I'm saying that since you're looking at the current balance, you'll actually have to have the entire formula as part of that check portion of the if function. So you would say if the entire formula is greater than or equal to the cell with the max balance, which in this case is B3, then you would have the formula but without the contribution added. Otherwise, you'd have the formula with the contribution added. So this is what we're talking about at this point. All right, now I'm starting to think forward a little bit to the next two columns, and I'm referencing at this point the announcement that I have the screenshot. And in the announcement with the screenshot in the lower right, I list out the 4 possible scenarios that you'd have to consider for the 529 and the savings. Those are going to be the 2 difficult columns because there's 4 possible conditions. Unlike the IRA, where there's 2 conditions, and the 2 conditions for the IRA are I've either maxed out or I haven't maxed out. With the 529 and the savings, you have a 2x2 matrix, which is 4 possibilities, where you're maxed out and the previous balance is also maxed out, or you're maxed out and the previous balance is not maxed out, or you're not maxed out and the previous balance is maxed out, or you're not maxed out and the previous balance is not maxed out. So there's 4 possible scenarios that you'd have to account for with the 529 and the savings. Now, since you're checking for 2 things with these scenarios, and you're checking for your balance and the other investment's balance, you'd have to also use an AND function inside of the if function to check those 2 things. And if they're both true, then that would determine whether or not you would have a payment or not have a payment. Or I'm sorry, whether or not payment, by payment I mean contribution, whether you'd have your own contribution and or the extra contribution of the previous investment. So that's what we're talking about at this point. So this one I see, while I've been talking to her about that, she's gone in and actually done the entire formula, so this will help you guys out a lot. She's done the entire formula for the 2 conditions for the IRA, which are either you're maxed out or you're not maxed out. And so she has, if my current balance is greater than the max balance, then my current balance is going to be just the previous balance plus the interest. Otherwise, it's going to be the previous balance plus the interest plus the contribution. So she's done that here correctly, and we are good to go. I believe I'm going to autofill here. Yeah, I'm going to autofill down, near that 10,000 mark. And I'm also, to kind of illustrate the point of the if function working, I'm going to do like a difference in balance right around that barrier mark to see if it changes. So I'm going to take 1 month and see the difference from the previous month. This is not something you do in the assignment. This is just kind of a proof of concept. And you can see that right before we get to that max amount, the difference changes. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go up here and show that it's, for the previous months leading up to that hitting that max balance, it's close to $100. It's around $100 growth you're seeing in this investment. After we hit the max balance and we stop contributing, you see that it drops to around $50. So that that $50 contribution goes away, and so the growth drops to just the interest earned, which in this case also happens to be around $50. All right, so now we're going back to the top, and she's asking about the next steps. So by the way, you should be good to go. I mean, this essentially is giving it to you for that first investment. I don't think there's too much more that I need to say. I'm going to leave the video running, but there won't be any more audio input from me. Pretty much her and I are just talking about the next two columns, which are more difficult. And I go back and I explain again the four scenarios and how you'd have to have four ifs, four nested ifs, and we talk about the AND function because you're checking for multiple things, that they both have to be true for these situations to work out. And that's pretty much it. But I think this video should hopefully get you going if you're really stuck on this portion.